And now we move on to with our discussion, but before we continue on, let's have this quick report. And Chadian Ministerial Summit pushes for final ceasefire in Sudan. Let's watch.
The first meeting of the ministerial mechanism of Sudan's neighboring countries concluded in the Chad on Monday, with agreement among the delegates for a three-part action plan for a final ceasefire. Chadian President Mohamed Idris Deby hosted the foreign ministers of Sudan's neighboring countries for a meeting to address the situation in Sudan across three key areas, namely security, political landscape, and humanitarian context. During the meeting, Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry stressed that Sudan's neighbors need to speak in a unified voice to convince the two parties in the armed conflict in their country to end hostilities. He noted that since the Sudanese people are not involved in this conflict or its underlying causes, it is the responsibility of neighboring countries to extend a helping hand to Sudan. He added that the Sudanese people expect them to speak in union to attain a common objective, to persuade the conflicting parties to immediately halt hostilities. Shoukry said Egypt has embarked on tangible steps towards achieving the objective of reconciliation, citing the hosting of meetings with the Mainstream Forces for Freedom and Change (FFC) Central Council in Cairo from July 24th till 25th. Shoukry underscored the prevailing uncertainty surrounding the Sudanese political process, with no discernible indications of a new trajectory. The top diplomat explained that the scale of human suffering is increasing every day amid an unprecedented shortage of food, medicine, and the basics of life, and cautioned against the complete uncertainty which characterizes the current political process in the country. Shoukry also stressed that the Sudanese people were never a party to the start of this war, and they all are looking to the initiative of their neighbors to end it. He asserted that Sudan's neighbors should aid Sudan while respecting the country's sovereignty and without imposing solutions or conditions on any one party. Shoukry urged more efforts from Sudan's neighbors to address the humanitarian crisis. In conclusion, the foreign minister reaffirmed Egypt's keenness to mediate between the two warring Sudanese parties. The ministerial-level mechanism, which aims to find a comprehensive solution to end the armed conflict in Sudan, was formed at the Sudan Neighboring Countries Summit that was hosted by Egypt on the 13th of July. The two-day mechanism meeting held in the Chadian capital, N'Djamena, was tasked with discussing the executive measures required to address the repercussions of the ongoing war on the future and stability of Sudan, its unity and territorial integrity, and ways to preserve its national institutions to prevent collapse. Meanwhile, a South Sudanese official hailed the ministerial mechanism meeting in Chad, describing it as a step towards a lasting solution to the conflict in Sudan. Since the outbreak of the conflict in Sudan in mid-April, Egypt has been coordinating with UN and international relief organizations to ensure the provision of the necessary aid to Sudanese refugees, as well as millions of citizens facing humanitarian catastrophe inside the country. Egypt has received more than 200,000 out of an estimated total of 750,000 Sudanese who fled Sudan to neighboring countries.
Welcome back, and as we are speaking here, Africa is one of the most important priority files, or comes in the forefront of Egypt's priority files. Definitely. The Sudanese issue, as Sudan is a strategic, or the strategic depth of Egypt's national security, has been on the top of the agenda. But Egypt has maintained a certain position towards African issues. To highlight the issue, we have with us over the phone His Excellency Ambassador Ahmed Hagag, former Assistant Secretary General of the African Union. Good evening to you, Your Excellency.
Good evening. I was the Assistant Secretary General of the OEU, Organization of African Union. Thank you.
The African Organization, yes, the African Organization.
Yes, please, OEU, please.
Right, which is now the African Union, right?
Exactly.
Exactly. Right, Your Excellency, here, let me here ask you about the African file and how Egypt has been putting the African file as a forefront priority.
Could you repeat the question again, please?
Right. So, Your Excellency, how Africa is a forefront priority for Egypt?
Yes, of course. Africa for a long time is priority number one for Egypt besides the Arab world. And Egypt has the biggest number of its embassies in Africa. Since independence, Egypt supported the liberation movements in Africa to gain their independence. And also Africa has the biggest number of their embassies in Cairo. And Egypt has been a founder of the Organization of African Unity, or the African Union, and President Sisi was playing a biggest role in his capacity as the chairman of the African Union, and hosted many meetings of African leaders here in Egypt.
Right. If I may ask you, Your Excellency, here about the exploding situations in Africa, particularly of what we are seeing of internal conflicts. Definitely on top of them, Sudan and now Niger. So how do you view how Egypt dealt so far? Let's start with Sudan, with the Sudanese file.
Egypt has a historical relationship with Sudan, and we have been worried about the developments in Sudan in the recent weeks and months, and we ask the stopping of any fighting in order to restore stability to this neighboring African country and Arab country also at the same time. Egypt opened its borders to refugees from Sudan, and we hosted also a meeting of the neighboring countries of Sudan in order to find a solution, and our foreign minister participated in the executive committee which was established by this neighboring countries of Sudan, which was held in Cairo some weeks ago.
Your Excellency, here Egypt has been putting or speaking on behalf of Africa on all the international forums and in the international arenas. How Egypt has carried the African causes to the world, and how did it represent the African voice to the international arena?
Always prefer to work in a concert of African countries. It is not an Egyptian policy alone. It is in concert with members of the African Union, because we have been a member of the Peace and Security Council emanating from the African Union. We have peacekeeping operations in several African countries, and we have technical assistance and even economic assistance to several African countries through the African Union or individually.
Indeed. Finally here, if I may ask you about challenges facing Africa so far and how Egypt is trying to go on both sides in parallel, the political and the economic one.
Hello?
Hello? Again. If I may ask you how Egypt is trying to maintain the African stability through going in two parallel lines, the political and the economic one.
We prepare both the political and the economic, and Egypt is pushing for the implementation of turning the continent to a free trade zone where goods and services are being exempted from custom duties, and this has led in the past to an increase in Egyptian exports to African countries and also imports to Egypt from African countries for essential raw materials, which is necessary for Egyptian industry. And politically, we are very active in the framework of the African Union and in bilateral relations with different African countries. Egypt, President Sisi was careful to invite many African leaders to come to Egypt, and he himself toured many African countries and had very important talks with the African leaders themselves.
Right. Your Excellency Ambassador Ahmed Hagag, former Assistant Secretary of the Organization of the African Union, which is now the African Union. Thank you so much for being with us, Your Excellency, and for your great input as usual.